the Reimagine Mobility podcast series. I'm here with Nick Ancell from E-Mobility Engineering magazine. So we've had a lot of different guests on this show so far from a lot of different technical areas and e-mobility and mobility space in general. That we're really talking here about the future, or again, as we call it, how do we reimagine mobility? I'm excited to have you on the show, Nick, because I think from the perspective of what you're looking at, from a magazine's perspective, you certainly get the trends, you get the different technologies, you get the different players, and you probably also see it how it plays in different regions of the world, and how currently the state is just in a small little section of e-mobility, which is obviously the EV vehicles. Sales are not always the greatest everywhere, so I'm super excited to talk about and what you guys, and specifically you, see from your perspective as we see reimagining mobility as a big topic going not only today, but certainly into the future. So Nick, give our listeners and viewers a little bit of a background of who you are, where you come from, what you currently do, and then let's dive in together and reimagine the future here.
Excellent. Thanks, Stefan. Well, as you said, my name's Nick Ancell. I'm the publisher of E-Mobility Engineering. Very pleased to be here. Thanks for the invitation. I know it's taken a while for us to connect on this, but yeah, it's great to be here. So E-Mobility Engineering, for those of you who don't know, is a bi-monthly technical magazine specifically for engineers working on e-mobility projects globally through all of the industry verticals. So we don't just cover automotive, we cover the whole ecosystem from a technical point of view. So part of the basis of our company is helping engineers learn from other engineers, no matter which space they're in. You know, the aviation guys are learning from automotive, the same in marine, across heavy duty and off highway. So I think one of the easy things is for people to just focus on cars, you know, where e-mobility is a lot bigger than that. Electrification is a lot bigger than that. So we started in 2018. We've been publishing racing magazines for the good old combustion engines for 20 years now. We also do autonomous. So it's a natural progression for us to move into e-mobility. Started off as a quarterly magazine, but with the growth of the industry, we've gone to a bi-monthly magazine with a supporting website, and we're publishing articles daily. You know, there's too much content to cover sometimes. And as I mentioned, you know, the focus is on the technical side of everything that we do. So we focus on battery materials. We go right the way into the chemistry, the materials, the sealing, the adhesives, and then straight into, you know, sort of the motors and everything, including the powertrain as well. So there's so many considerations, you know, that engineers have to sort of understand and learn from their parts.
So then when we dive in directly then, Nick, and let's talk about what is everybody's mind right now is EVs are sort of stuck, right? We've come a very long way, not only on the technology, but also on the number of EVs we're selling. Now we're sort of reached a plateau, as what I believe, as it relates to sales numbers. How do you guys, from your perspective in your business, again, magazine, are you feeling this sort of plateauing as it relates to the engineering pieces related to e-mobility across the board? Or are you actually seeing the exact opposite, and everybody says, okay, we get a little bit of a breather, now we can really catch up? Or do you see, no, we have not really seen anything slowing down since 2021, whenever that exactly time frame is when EVs really on a global basis, not just China and Europe, but also the US, really started to take off? Share a little bit from that perspective.
Yeah, I think sort of the EV industry slowing down is it's across the board. People are saying about how the sales are slowing down. And I think from a consumer point of view, we might have hit a plateau. And there's various different reasons we see behind that. But when you look at the technology, when you look at the OEMs, when you look at the solution providers, there's so much going on. As I say, you know, there's more content than we can publish. So, you know, looking at the solution providers themselves, like yourselves, and all the others in the industry, we're seeing new products come along almost daily. We're seeing new innovations. The research and development is just steaming ahead. But you're correct. You know, the sort of across the board, apart from places like China, the sales for consumers has slowed down. And that's got nothing to do with the technology. That's got nothing to do with the cars which are available. I think a lot of it comes in from misinformation, partly from journalists and mainstream media who are really sort of, talking about issues that are non-issues for most consumers. Obviously we've been through range anxiety, we're going through charging anxiety. We see articles daily in the UK about how EVs are creating damage to the roads. Car park owners should be wary. These cars are a lot heavier, but they're really non-issues. I think that's a big part where a lot of the OEMs can help with a lot more education towards the consumers, not just about what the vehicle is, but how it can benefit their life, and how we need to move forward and change mobility, because it just can't go on as it is. Obviously you mentioned China. That's obviously a very hot topic for a lot of people at the moment. But they've set the standard, let's be honest, and they developed their EVs before everyone else, but the way they brought them to market, the way they brought the buy-in from the consumers, completely different. In some cities, the taxis turned to EVs. So people who were catching taxis got to experience an EV without going and test driving one, without having to purchase one. They just saw the benefits straight away. And obviously there are other cities in Europe and the US which do that. Amsterdam's a great sort of, example. As soon as you get off the Schiphol airport, there's a Tesla waiting for you, So there's a lot lacking in education and awareness. And you've got to look at people's use cases as well. So I think the stage of the early adopters is over. We're starting to see them become more mainstream. But when people are told that they need X amount of range, you've got to look at how far people actually drive in a day. The US is a different use case. You guys have got a great expanse. People drive a lot longer than they do here in the UK and Europe. Most people are making short journeys. Most guys are taking their kids to the schools, running to the shops, maybe commuting to work. So they don't really need more than 200 to 300 miles. Obviously, there's exceptions to the cases. You've got sales reps who are covering hundreds of miles, almost thousands of miles a week. But when you break it down to what people actually need, there's a lot of misinformation. I think that's probably the biggest problem with the adoption of EVs at the moment. And when we look at the adoption of EVs as well, charging infrastructure is a huge problem. But we can overcome this, and everyone needs to sort of group together and think of it as one. I think one of the biggest problems with the charging infrastructure, again, is the education. But you don't need to stop for 40 minutes to an hour to charge a car. And we see a lot of technologies coming through and a lot of changes in strategies as well. Everyone always starts talking about we need the biggest battery, the biggest range. But there are some OEMs out there who are starting to rethink that, and they're producing smaller batteries with faster charging capabilities. So you can go to 80% with some batteries which are coming through in 5 minutes worth of charging that we've covered. And that is a game changer for most people. And, I've talked about it before at events when people say, oh, I need a huge range. I go on these long journey trips. I am one of those silly people who's done an 850-mile drive in one go. And it's horrendous. People don't want to be doing that. So these little rest breaks are what people need, to keep EVs going. So I think there's a lot of lessons to be learned from China, but that's one of the sort of ethos of what we do, is looking at how people can learn from one another, from different countries to different industries as well. And when you talk about Europe, obviously we've got a lot of borders in Europe. It's an open place, but when you look at things like vehicle to grid coming through, bi-directional charging, in Europe, we're one of the early adopters of that because we have the rollout of the smart meters. But when you're traveling from, say, Switzerland to France or to Germany regularly, that becomes a lot more of an issue. And you hear stories of people with charging cards, trunks of different charging cards for all the different applications. So we need that sort of interoperability and focus of moving the industry forward. So China, again, it's such an interesting case at the moment. Some of the vehicles coming out of there. If you look back in sort of my history in automotive from where I come from, was from a young child with the hot hatches. It was all about the German manufacturers, the French manufacturers. I was slightly after the great British automotive scene. But And it's just time where it's changed. And the innovation coming out of China is unbelievable. I mean, we've got the BYD's Yang, which has a flood prevention system, which can drive through a flood. It could actually, navigate itself through water for 30 minutes, with full ceiling, the sunroof open so you can escape if you need to. So I think everyone just sort of needs to get on board with EV adoption and look at their own use case itself. I mean, for us here in the UK, buying something for us as a family that can tow horses, weekend out, there's not really a vehicle that can do that in the EV space. So it doesn't fit everyone, but I think looking forward, we will get to that point, and it's still the early stages. We've had Teslas for a while, we've had a few other different EVs for a while, but it's still the early days. When we look 5-10 years down the line, it's going to be a whole different situation, especially when we look at
an
EVs.
Interesting point about charging infrastructure, right? As I mentioned, I was in Switzerland for 2 weeks just recently, and I was blown away by the fast charging infrastructure they have on the highways. I mean, there were special places where you can pull to the side on the highway. There wasn't even a rest area. It was literally just a fast charging station. And I drove from the north of Switzerland all the way down to the south, and it was throughout on that major highway. I mean, every 20, if not 30 kilometers, there was one of those things. I was very impressed. They weren't very busy, which was interesting at the same time, but the infrastructure is there. So great point on infrastructure. It's a challenge everywhere to one degree or another, right? But let's jump into one thing that you mentioned a little bit, the technology coming out of China, and just generally staying with technology for a moment, Nick. What do you guys see from a magazine? I know everybody's talking about, how important the battery is for an e-mobility vehicle, whatever, a heavy-duty truck, medium-duty truck, a passenger vehicle. Everybody talks about either an e-axle or just the e-motor, right? Those are sort of, everybody knows and everybody talks about this, but from your perspective, from a publisher's perspective, what are some other technologies that maybe not too many people are talking about, but you see as much activity and maybe as much criticality for engineering people working on it than batteries, e-motors, and e-axles?
Materials. Full stop. Materials is probably the most important topic that we cover outside of batteries, outside of motors. When you're talking about increasing range and talking efficiency, lightweighting is a huge issue. It's making the vehicles lightweight so they can go that much further, but then incorporating the same safety standards. So I think, but then that trickles down into every area that you've just previously mentioned. It is about materials. It's about safety as well. And I think sort of everyone's so focused on the battery at the moment. That's where the dollar is. It's where the pound is. It's where the euro is. Everyone's focused on the battery, and sometimes we lose that focus on the other side of things. And it's very easy to talk about it, but it's the interior. The interior of the vehicle, the materials that the seats are made out of, the interior. For everything, even the wheels come down to it. So I think the materials is probably the strongest point in terms of technology development at the moment. And that comes down from the raw materials to then the finished material that goes into the car. So, I think that's probably the key area that people need to focus on and that we see as well. But then it comes down into adhesives. It's every single consideration that the engineer has to have when they're producing these vehicles. How are they going to bond the battery? We've seen huge underfloor batteries, and now we're moving to batteries actually being adapted to be involved in the body of the vehicle. And not talking about the battery technology, it's the adhesives, the sealants that make that happen. So we see a lot of movement in that material point of view, whether it's silicons, whether it's carbon fiber. The list is endless, and this is what's an exciting thing about mobility at the moment. It's not a done deal. There's so many different areas of innovation, and so many people are coming through with great ideas each day. Funding's obviously a huge issue when we come into these points. You can have a fantastic idea. Some of the solutions that are coming through are just far too expensive, which is again, it goes back to the cost point of these vehicles. It's stopping the adoption. So we have to get the costs of the manufacturing down, but to make these vehicles happen, we have to use these special materials, which is driving the cost up. And it's, 2/3, they say, of the vehicle cost is the battery. So I'm not saying there are corners being cut, but there are, areas where the actual finance into that area of technology gets reduced. So, yeah, I mean, we enjoy our articles on materials. If you look back over our publications, every article that we produce, it goes down to the materials, whether it's about motor, whether it's about battery, whether it's about axles or the vehicle construction, in any industry,
Good
it
point.
comes down to materials.
So if we go back to the true purpose of this podcast and reimagining mobility, and you said your magazine, or this particular magazine, it's being published since 2018. So you've seen, let's say, 6 years of progression in e-mobility. If we leave passenger vehicles alone for a moment and leave it up to medium duty trucks, heavy duty trucks, aerospace, agricultural, mining, whatever it might be, what are the most exciting areas you look towards, again, besides passenger vehicles, as we talk e-mobility? Is it in areas like forestry that very few people are talking about? Oh, I need an electric, I don't know what we got to do, a machine that cuts wood. We need more electric machines for working in the mountains or whatever it is. Interested in your perspective, and again, from the demand probably from your customers, from the engineering field, and what they want to see published, as well as what you mentioned at the very beginning, which I thought was interesting. The purpose of your magazine is to try and bring e-mobility engineers from different segments of the e-mobility space together and teach things. So again, reimagining mobility, what excites you the most outside of passenger vehicles when we talk e-mobility, and why?
Well, it's a fantastic point. It's a great question. And I get excited about this because whenever someone sees the magazine, they understand we work in e-mobility or EVs, they just think us. They think the automotive industry. But it's so much bigger than that. It starts at micro-mobility. Let's look at the scooters. Let's look at that sort of, even down to personal watercraft. I mean, looking at some of the vehicles we've covered, we've gone from snowmobiles, going up to see the Northern Lights. We've covered excavators. The first issue we ever published had the Pipistrel Alpha Electro, which was a battery-powered, light aircraft. To give you a little snapshot, in one of the later editions this year, we're actually having the Fortescue and Liebherr excavator mining thing, which is, the size of people's houses. This is unbelievable engineering, and that's where our readers get excited. If we talk about off-highway, heavy-duty, large construction machinery, people are excited because it goes back to, creating vehicles that have to endure rugged and harsh environments. We've just actually covered a snow groomer, of all things. There are electrified snow groomers up on the ski slopes day in, day out at the moment, part of projects. So I think this is what a lot of people need to understand, is every area of vehicles is getting electrified. It doesn't stop at the passenger car. It doesn't stop at the excavators, the medium duty lorries. It's absolutely everywhere. And each industry, each vertical has its own challenge. You look at vehicles that return to base. Batteries are a fantastic solution for that. But then you look at certain aspects, as soon as you talk about aviation, as soon as you start going from light aircraft up to larger aircraft, weight is your biggest issue, which it always has been, So the innovation there, there's a lot of talk about hydrogen fuel cells. So I think, when we look at the different areas of electrification, the bigger and the heavier, a ship, big ships, you can put a lot on it. You can weigh those down and they keep on going. But again, every area of mobility that gets electrified has a direct impact on everyone's lives. People who are living next to construction sites. Cities are still getting expanded, still getting built, If you're living next to one of those construction sites, you don't want to hear diggers going on. You don't want to hear the lorries coming in and out. So I think, that's one of the biggest areas of education from a consumer point of view, is to understand it's not just about your cars. They're not just trying to get you into your passenger vehicles, your battery vehicles to save the world. It trickles down into absolutely every area. I mean, marine, you just have to watch the demonstrations of how much combustion engines pollute the lakes. There are so many lakes which are banning combustion engines, and it's just making the whole world of experience better for everyone. And you don't have to hear the motors going, and people still love the sound of combustion engines. You can't get away from that. You just have to look at the racing world. People are moaning. I mean, take Formula One, for example, and just moving off topic slightly. People moan, the fans moan. We're not having the screaming V10s, the V8s anymore. We've got the hybrid vehicles, but these cars are going faster. They're doing faster lap times than they've ever done. And isn't that sort of the sole purpose of the pinnacle of motorsport? Is to push the boundaries, and that's exactly what engineers are doing at the moment. They're really getting hold of how they can push the boundaries and making everything more efficient. It's a great topic looking outside of automotive, and we get really excited about it. The readers get really excited about it. The manufacturers do as well. So it's an exciting time. I hate to use the phrase "an exciting time to be alive," but we are so still at the beginning of this. It's forestry is a huge area. I mean, these machines that we've been using for years and years and years have been pumping out, noxious gases. They've been damaging areas, and now they can move slightly silently. They can, go into areas where they haven't been able to go to before. And we're trying to conserve the world, so why not do it in this way? So, big heavy duty is massive, massive focus for OEMs and engineers and suppliers at the moment, as you probably know.
Yeah. So you just touched upon your last sentence here, engineering. That's where I want to go next, at least for the next couple of minutes until we wrap up. Your magazine is for engineers. I'd like you to go to 2018 or 2019, right? And share a little bit very, very shortly, because again, we're about reimagining things. But what were engineers mainly concerned about in 2018, 2019 when it comes to e-mobility? What are they today? And what is it going to be as we're reimagining mobility going forward? And I'll give you an example. I would say up until about 3-4 years ago, systems engineering was nowhere near as big as it is today. Today, I think more and more companies recognize that you can get more, all the things we talked about today. You get more weight out of this vehicle, you can get more range out of the vehicle, you get more cost out of the vehicle. When you look at a vehicle, instead of a bunch of Lego blocks that you bring together and then put together and say, okay, here, now go mass produce this thing. When you look at it from the beginning, from a complete systems perspective, which means systems engineering, system integration, system design, all the stuff, system, and then some engineering discipline, is becoming critical. So, but again, it's not my show right now, it's yours. What do you see in 18? What do you see today? And then most importantly, what do you see as we're reimagining? What's the next big topic engineers need to focus on?
So back in 2018, I think the overarching topic, as I've mentioned, is battery. Everyone's focusing on battery. So back in 2018, it was very much about the battery. It was very much about the motors, and again, the materials. So over the past few years, we've moved into safety. Everyone's concerned about safety. We've had a lot of scare stories, whether they're false, whether they're true. There are a lot of stories out there about EVs spontaneously catching fire, thermal runaway. Those issues will never go away. So over the past few years, we've seen from developing using the best battery materials, which again will never go away, but it's, we're getting there. We're getting towards solid state. We're getting towards fast charging. We've then focused a lot on, as I said, safety. The biggest topic there is thermal runaway. Is that battery safety? But we're now in software-defined vehicles. We're now talking about cybersecurity. You've got to think about how these vehicles are. If we move away from the battery, the motors, the powertrain, the whole experience of a driver for an EV is very much about the infotainment system, the accessibility. We've got a lot more distractions there, but then we've got connected vehicles, so there is a lot more going on where we talk about cybersecurity, when we talk about software-defined vehicles, and I think that's going to be the big focus for the next few years. And this is one of the reasons why people are scared. They think people are going to hack into their vehicles, as they're driving down the freeway. And there have been a few examples of that in the past, So that's probably the biggest thing, is making these vehicles safer. Not from a crash point of view. We've got fantastic in terms of producing vehicles with a safe, but it's that accessibility from the outside, making sure that everyone is safe. And I think, we're going to start to see people move away from the infotainment system, because there's a lot of talk about distraction. Right. There's these huge screens. People are leaning over. It's the whole, it used to be putting your CD in that. Now people are using their massive screens, access windscreen wipers and stuff. And, we sort of, humans don't need to be distracted when they're in charge of a 2-ton vehicle. Let's be honest about that. So, but yeah, cybersecurity is probably one of the biggest issues. And when people talk about, vehicles come from China, they are software-defined vehicles. They're very much running on the software. That is, one of the biggest issues at the moment for engineers and for consumers.
Okay. Great point. And I agree. Software-defined vehicle definitely is the up-and-coming thing, domain controllers, central compute platforms, all the stuff associated. I think at the end, still a major systems challenge, but to your point, the focus is shifting to the software-defined vehicle. It's great ending. So then the last question for you, Nick, nothing to do with your magazine or maybe what you're seeing, but what is going to be the next vehicle you buy and why?
I don't know, to be honest. That's a really hard question, Stefan. Personally, not waving the flag of the magazine or the EV industry, before EVs become mainstream, there's a few vehicles I've got to tick off, before they're not available. There's a few Porsches out there, there's a few Mercedes. There's some of the hot hatches when I was younger that maybe, if I can convince my wife, we'll have on the driveway again one day. It's very difficult. I think it's a great point as well, because the used car industry at the moment is booming. People are holding on to their vehicles because they don't know what's happening, and they want to enjoy their combustion vehicles. They want to hear especially in the US, they want to hear roaring V8s before they come. So for me, it's very tricky because we have a specialized use case, as I mentioned. We tow horses around for our daughters to compete with. So finding the right vehicle is hard. For me, I would love it to be on the Everati 964 converted 911s. The wallet probably doesn't agree or will allow that. But yeah, that's a very difficult question to answer. I'd love to say an EV right now, but yeah, there's a few cars to tick off the list.
Perfect answer. I appreciate it. Thank you so much, Nick, for your insight from the magazine's perspective, which is a unique perspective, and also what you see not only in the UK, but in Europe and globally. So thank you very much for your insight.